everybody. Thank you for coming. We have Morgan Peck from American Title. We have Nick Falahy from American Title, and we have Tara Hatch from Farm Bureau Hatch Family Insurance. Thank you, everybody. We're going to give the floor to Nick. He's going to start us off.
I need to apologize first because I wasn't on the email that I got. I saw Taryn and Morgan on there, so thanks for not including me, but then inviting me to come in and talk. So I appreciate it. I loved it because Morgan came in with a nice packet. You guys have it, right? Business cards, nicely printed out. Let me show you my level of preparation right here. So,
you know who's really important.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
He's learning quick.
Yeah.
Just show up.
Women are in charge.
She came into my office at about 10:30 and said, "Are you ready?" And I said, "For what?" Here we are.
He thinks he's hilarious.
I appreciate you guys having me, and I know a number of you already, but in my previous career before American Title, I was an attorney for about 18 and a half years. Still am, but wanted to get out of that line of work and into something a little more fun, and that's how I ended up at American Title. I have been referred to in the past by some of my realtor friends as a deal killer when I was working in the legal realm. So now, though, I want to let you all know that we're here to help at American Title, and I hope all of you in the room use us and really review your title work closely as soon as you get it, because if there's something on there that jumps out at you that maybe you didn't know about before you reached out to us, it's good to open those lines of communication earlier rather than later so we can try to solve some problems for you before we get to the date of closing. But as I said, I practiced real estate law, general civil litigation, and family law. Those were my three main practice areas when I was practicing. And so handled, if I had to guess, over 1,000 eviction cases, and probably about 100 or so boundary line disputes, easement cases, things like that. And so I think from our perspective at the title company, it allows me to have bring something maybe different or additional to the title world, and hopefully be able to use that to help all of you. The primary thing I wanted to talk about today was fraud, because it's everywhere in our world. It's the thing that I think about the most every day, and it's too bad that I have to do that, but it's everywhere in the title world. And so I wanted to use today to introduce you all to a new software that we're using called Certified. It should be in your packet. And it's not an app. It is software, and Certified got mad at me for calling it an app before because they don't have that. But it's a good way to verify IDs for people who are out of state, out of town, out of the country. And so when we have like a mail away situation, or you all have a seller that is not local that you haven't met, it's a good tool to use to make sure that we're all staying safe. And it really does protect the title company as well as all of you in the lending and the real estate world. So there's a little bit of information in the packet that Morgan gave you. And there are a few tools that we can use with Certified depending on the situation. But a really good one, and I'll give you an example. We had a file just about a couple weeks ago where we had property in the city of Jackson. Seller was an LLC. The sole member of the seller LLC resided in Turkey, as in the country of Turkey. And so then we had that person who was the member, he had a power of attorney located in the state of Ohio. And we had two powers of attorney with different signatures. And so, we're sitting there's red flags everywhere, right? They're everywhere. And so we were able to use Certified to verify his Turkish passport, and it turned out to be a legitimate situation. We couldn't believe it. You know, we had been talking about it in the office. There's no way this
There's
is
no
legit.
way.
There's no way. I mean, it's not a 0% chance. It was a negative chance that this is legit.
We
It
were
was. It really was. It was legitimate. He was a property investor. He's from out of the country, certified. Their platform allowed us to use his passport, and we verified that it was legitimate, which was awesome. So better to find that out, obviously, before the transaction occurs than after for everyone in the room. So it was a great way to use it, and I think the whole process took him like, I don't know, 4 minutes or something like that from 5,000 miles away or whatever it was. So a really good tool. Wanted to bring it up to you all, so if there is a time in the future where you have a closing and we may ask one of your clients to verify ID, verify wire instructions, things like that, but it's pretty simple, and we'll walk them through it, or certified employees are there to help as well. But the fraud is rampant. We have a ton of seller impersonation fraud going on, especially with vacant land. We had another situation recently where we had a property in Columbia Township, and it had been previously listed for sale, and the listing expired, and we had a person who turned out to be, I think, from Nigeria, but said he was from Canada, who was interested in buying it, for sale by owner. And so he, ultimately what he did, and I don't even know if it was a he or she or who it was, but because it was probably a fake name, but sent us a purchase agreement, and ultimately sent us a check that was drawn off Scotia Bank out of Canada. And then after we received the initial check from the buyer, they terminate the purchase agreement by agreement between the parties. As you guys can imagine, the person out at Lake Columbia, Columbia Township, had no idea that their home was for sale. So they knew it was previously, but had no idea. And so we deposit the checks, and then the fraudster from who knows where decides to say, well, hey, once those checks clear, can you wire the money back to us? Red flags? Anyone?
Yeah.
Red flags? Right? So this is unfortunately just a day in the life. This is,
Yes.
it's every day. And so we, in that situation, we can use certified to verify wire instructions to make sure they're going, where they need to be. The wire instructions that this person sent us appeared to go through a bank in Mexico. So we have an IP address out of Nigeria, buyer out of Canada, seller out of Jackson, IP or wire instructions that go through Mexico, and then we have this random address out in Idaho somewhere. So I jump on Google Earth real quick and I'm looking it up, and it is just a totally rundown house out in Idaho. So again, for us, in the title world, really important to use certified to make sure we're protected, to make sure you all are protected. And so wanted to, again, run it by you today. If you talk to other agents, lenders, let them know that it's something that we have. If you have a contract that's going through our office and you all would like us to use certified for whatever reason, if you have any concerns, let us know. We're here to help. With that, I don't want to take up too much time because I wasn't even on the agenda, but I can turn it over to Taryn and then to Morgan, or vice versa. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. I think Morgan attached my business card
I did,
to
yes.
her very good
She let me
packet.
put your card on there.
Yes.
I even put it at the top. Did you guys notice that?
Yeah, very nice of her. So anyway, it was good to talk to all of you. I appreciate you for letting me kind of come here and talk for a few minutes. And if you guys need anything, seriously, reach out, okay?
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
Yep.
Lauren, or Taryn, let's jump into a couple things on insurance. So first you had kind of went over like closing dates.
Yeah, just some of the things that,
you know, I like to try and get, especially my lenders, when I hear that, oh, we need a quote, or my realtor is sending me a referral and we need a quote for this person. Good communication between me and the lender, whoever insurance agent you go through, insurance agent and the lender is very important. Closing dates, when we're sent, you know, the closing date's the 15th, we bind a deal for the 15th, and then they bump the closing date out to the 29th. That can change your rating on a house, that can change whether or not we have to redo the entire thing. If they make the closing date earlier than that, that is a rewrite of the whole policy. So there's just certain things where we wanna make sure that's straight. Lender requirements on a property are important also. Just had one this week we're dealing with where roof proofs can stop a deal. So if you can get your seller, your buyer, whoever, your appraiser to do something to show how old that roof is. The lender's requiring replacement costs on a roof, and that roof cannot be shown to be, like the house wasn't built last year. It's gonna be ACV'd. So actual cash value. And that's gonna show on the deck pages, and then they're like, well, we have to have replacement costs on it. Insurance companies now, because of fraud and other things, are not gonna cover roofs at full replacement costs. It's just becoming a huge deal where forever agents are putting, we don't know how old the roof is, let's just put 10 years. You know, can't find it, whatever. This one looks in pretty good shape, we'll put, and it's found that roof is in awful condition. And so then the insurance company's having to pay replacement costs on a roof that they should have only paid maybe 10 grand out on or whatever. So that is becoming a huge factor, especially with all the uptick in bad weather that we've been having. Nice thing, Farm Bureaus, we're just Michigan, so you're not paying for Florida and California. Yay. So we also have a lot more control over our rates on things like that, but we still have, you know, it's still a business, we're still trying to control losses in that area, so. We're not like some companies where we require a roof inspection by one of our people first, but roof proofs are huge, so we need those. Closing dates, big deal. Deductibles, now when you get the quotes, and if you don't go over them, or the insurance agent doesn't go over them with the buyer, this is why we need to have communication with the buyer also. If the insurance company's coming back with, oh, this quote's at $1,200, well, the deductible's $5 grand. Who's gonna make a claim when their deductible's $5 grand? They're already paying a lot of money for insurance, and then they can't even make a claim because they can't afford to come with $5 grand out of their pocket. So does that make sense to have a $1,200 annual pay when they could be a $2,500 deductible or a $1,000 deductible and be a couple $100 more a year? So that is something that I've noticed, is that there's a lot of companies coming back with these 1% of the dwelling coverage, the house. So if the house is $200,000, they have to come up with, you know, 1% of that, and that's not something a lot of people can do necessarily. So we want to look at that. We want to look at the type of property it is. So if it's a lake property, what other stuff goes along with that house? Does it have a seawall? Does it have boat lifts? Does it have things that traditional home policies are not going to cover? Pollution coverage, you know, that boat sinks. And then how much is it to clean that up? What are the fines for that? So lake properties, is there some acreage involved? Are there outbuildings involved? Most home covers or home carriers that you're gonna think of won't cover barns. They won't cover certain aspects of that property. So you wanna make sure that, you know, that barn falls down on someone, that it's covered, or they have money to remove it, you know. If there's a storm goes through and the outbuilding falls down that wasn't covered, or that pole barn, you know, you have other structures coverage is gonna be 10% typically of whatever the house, $200,000 house, $20,000 for your detached structures. If you have a 40 by 60 pole barn, is 20 grand gonna pay for that pole barn? No, it's not. So we have to look at that. And then does it make sense to have that on a home policy, or you look at a country estate or a farm policy? So if they have 5 acres or they have more acres, you can look at a different type of policy. Also, are the different parcels listed? You can't have it just on the address. You have to separate out the parcels and have each one of those listed for the liability. It doesn't add to the cost of the policy. It does, I guess. I don't know if anybody else. It doesn't add to the cost of the policy, but it does ensure that there's liability coverage on those parcels. So wanna make sure that's, something that's taken into account. And again, looking at the home coverage and the property in general, we don't wanna over insure people and have them paying for like, okay, you have an unfinished basement, you're not doing anything with it anytime soon. Yes, water backup is important, but do you need $20,000 in water backup for your cinder block and concrete basement? That's just hacking the policy. So you don't necessarily need that. So make sure they're talking to the client about what they do need. And if they finish that basement, by all means, let's add that coverage in. But they can do that later. There's things that can be done. If they're remodeling the whole house, that's something that I need to know. I don't necessarily need to know it for closing, but the client needs to let me know so that if they're remodeling the house or putting additions on later, that's not necessarily covered. So we gotta make sure that stuff's covered, because God forbid that house burned down mid-remodel. So you also want to make sure that you are putting your clients with someone who's gonna follow up with them. They come home and there's 1,000 gallons of water that dumped on the floor while they're in mire, that they can call someone at 11 o'clock at night, and I'm gonna send someone over that is, I'm gonna call custom restoration, or I'm gonna call this company or whatever that can get right over there. I can yell at them if they mess up. So, that's a big deal, but that's just, the closing aspect, we wanna make sure if there's gonna be questions from underwriters, give me a couple weeks. Don't tell me you need it tomorrow, we need it in 3 days. That's gonna make it difficult, because then you get surprises from underwriters who come back with a letter of pre-cancellation to the client saying, you have to have this railing replaced. You have more than 3 risers, you have to have railings on these steps, or we're gonna cancel your policy. Oh, we see that the paint's messed up on the back of the house. You have to have this painted in 30 days, or we're gonna cancel the policy. So you wanna make sure all that is through underwriting before, I just send out a general cheapest quote I can figure out and just send it. And then after the closing, once underwriting sees the pictures and they're like, whoa, we have to exclude that garage, we have to exclude that shed, we have to exclude that, this, that, the other thing. We're gonna cancel it in 30 days if they don't do that. The client doesn't wanna hear that, and they don't wanna have to come up with, they just bought a house, they don't wanna have to come up with the money to do this, this, and this, last minute. So that stuff, so time before the closing is important, if possible. I get there's last minute stuff that happens, but if we can have 2 weeks, me, whoever, that gives us time to get underwriting handled, no surprises for the client, so they're happy, smooth transition there. And then also, I like to look up prior loss reports on houses. I don't know if everybody does that, but I like to look up prior loss reports so I can see that there was a septic backup that caused $10,000 in damage. There was a fire 10 years ago. Did that actually get repaired, or did John and Karen take their check from Farm Bureau and John fixed it himself? And John watched a video on YouTube, so he knew how to do it. So you wanna make sure that it was actually fixed. Have there been recurring problems, So how fresh is that water line in the basement?
So do you feel that that's really important for us to do maybe during our property inspection, to have you look that up and do it so we know then?
Yeah, cause if it's something that,
A huge repair or something?
future repair, yeah.
On the seller's
There was a
description.
very, very nice house that, I did on one of the lakes where they did have a $50,000 claim from the septic tank failing and backing up in all kinds of crap, literally.
Literally.
But you don't wanna spend $650,000 on a house and then find out, oh, we have to put in a whole new septic system, or have that beautiful, cause they remodeled the basement, but did they fix the problem?
Right.
So you have this beautiful finished basement, and then if that septic backs up again, make sure that that's been taken care of before you put your people in there. So, just stuff like that. Inspections are great to have. I need to know if there's knob and tube in a house, because that's not necessarily a question I remember to ask, try to, and it's supposed to be, it's the client's responsibility to tell us that technically, but if there's knob and tube in that house and it's visible and there's a fire, guess what's not covered? That house. So we need to know stuff like that. So we make sure that the client's covered correctly. We're not trying to make them pay more money, but we do wanna make sure that they do have coverage is correct, and that they can also call us or get a hold of us if they need to afterwards, and make sure that your clients are happy, so. You make the sale, I wanna take care of them after the sale.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, Morgan,
All right.
you're up.
So before we got started today, guys, I provided everybody with a fun packet. Everybody has one of those, right? Perfect. So Missy was kind enough to give me a little bit of information regarding what you guys want to hear about from us as the title company. So I took her advice, and she said, she said you guys wanted to hear about tax prorations, and you guys wanted to hear about how to read some closing statements. So we're gonna start with tax prorations. So if you wanna grab there's a little booklet in the nice folder that's titled tax proration. We're all gonna grab that, we're all gonna reference that, okay? Because we're gonna kinda look some examples, we're gonna do all kinds of things with that.
How many hours do we have?
We,
I told her Cliff Notes
Cliff
version.
Notes.
I
So,
need a tax proration.
oh, you need a booklet. We don't wanna leave you out. So something on that note, in all seriousness, Mick, he makes a good point. Tax prorations, I could teach a class on those alone, and I could spend several hours talking to you guys about tax prorations. We are going to cover a couple little tidbits about tax prorations, and we're also going to cover basic definitions and some basics examples on those prorations. So if we flip open to the very first page, we're gonna talk about a couple little tidbits about those prorations. One of the most important things to remember, and something that's often forgotten, the tax proration is negotiated in the purchase contract. It is very important to know that it doesn't matter where the property is located. What that purchase agreement says is how the taxes will be prorated. It doesn't matter if the property is in Jackson County. If that purchase agreement says to prorate based on a due date advance method, that is what is going to be done unless there is an addendum changing that. I'm guessing almost everybody knows that typically, again, I'm gonna use the word typically, taxes are prorated in Jackson based on calendar year in arrears, right? That's what we see the most common, but again, it doesn't matter. We have to go by what that purchase agreement says. So something else to kind of keep in mind, if the purchase agreement says local custom, I will tell you, I personally hate the term local custom, because that is open to interpretation, right? Anybody can have a different opinion on what the term local custom means. If the purchase agreement states that, we are going to be reaching out to you for clarification. We're going to need an addendum very specifically confirming, are we prorating due date forward? Are we prorating calendar year in arrears? That has to be made very crystal clear. Another common misconception when it comes to taxes and the prorations is how the taxes are paid and how the taxes are prorated are two completely different things. So every township may have a different way that they calculate how the taxes are going to be paid. That has absolutely nothing to do with how they're going to be prorated. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Mm-hmm. Okay, so we are going to go ahead, we're gonna skip ahead, we're gonna skip a couple pages here. We are going to start talking about some examples. So we're gonna take a look at, we're gonna skip a couple pages. It's the one that says calendar year basis as paid in arrears. Your page is gonna look like this. This is where we're gonna skip ahead to. Okay. So, a lot of you have seen a Jackson purchase agreement, yes? We know that the Jackson purchase agreement states, it's pre-printed in there, that taxes are gonna be prorated calendar year in arrears, so that is gonna be the most common method that we're going to see. Okay, so I'm gonna give you guys a very similar example that you've probably heard me explain in a closing. I say it every time. I go in depth a little bit more if I have to, if I get somebody that gives me a very puzzled look, because it does happen. Tax prorations are one of those things that people do feel the most confused about, and honestly, it's about the most questions that I get at the closing table are regarding the tax prorations. So calendar year in arrears. What that means is that taxes, it's right in the name, are gonna be prorated based on a calendar year, which is going to start January 1st. So the example that we have printed here shows that we're gonna have a closing date of April 15th, which means that the seller is going to be responsible for taxes from January 1st to April 14th. The buyer is going to be responsible for taxes from April 15th all the way through the end of the year, because we are prorating based on a calendar year. Another piece that's pre-written in the Jackson purchase agreement states that if the current year tax bills are not available, then we are going to be using the millage rate, and we're gonna multiply that by the taxable value, and that's what we're going to use for that proration. Because we want it to be accurate, right? Last year's tax bill really might not cut it. So we take the most current year's taxable value, we actually pull all of the millage rates from the township office. We have somebody in our office that calls and gets all of that information for us. We have it in a little handy dandy worksheet. If you guys ever want a copy of that, you've got our cards, reach out to us, we're happy to share it. We're not gonna hoard any of our material, right? We're happy to share anything with you guys. So, you see here for this property, on our example, we're showing the taxable value. We have the millage rate, and that's what we're projecting. I believe this example is for the year 2022. Not that it matters, but, so we wouldn't be using 21's tax bills. We're gonna use best guess, we're gonna take taxable, multiply that by the millage rate. We're gonna add those two totals together. And we are going to divide that by 365 days, because that's how many days we've got in a year. It comes out to about $5.50 per day. We can see that the seller is responsible for 104 days of that, which equals about $572. Okay, so on our closing statement, what you would see for this particular example is that this is gonna be a charge to the seller and a credit to the buyer. Because keep in mind, the buyer is responsible for all future tax bills that are gonna come out that year for this property. Pop quiz, when do the tax bills come out? July?
December 1st.
Yes, July 1st and December 1st. So the buyer is gonna be responsible for that July 1st bill and that December bill. Okay? Does anybody have any questions before we move on from that? There are additional examples, but because we are kind of limited on time, I'm gonna skip to the next page. I'm not gonna go over all of them. Something to keep in mind before I start with the next example. Calendar year in arrears can look different as a credit, debit, depending on the amount of the tax bill, depending on the time of the year that we're at. Sometimes it can be a credit to the seller, sometimes it's a charge to the seller, and vice versa. So we're gonna take a look a little bit of a different example where it's going to actually be a credit to the seller. Let's go ahead and flip over to the next page, and at the bottom, do you see where it says closing date of December 15th? Okay, so we're gonna look at that example. So the bills have already come out for this year, right? Because July 1st and December 1st has come and gone. We're gonna use those actual bills for our example here. So $330.10 was the summer bill. $602.77 was that winter bill. We're gonna take those total taxes, we're gonna do the same thing, we're gonna divide it by 365. That's gonna equal about $2.55 per day. Now, the seller's responsible for taxes from January 1st to December 14th. But they paid both of those bills already. So that's something that needs to be taken into consideration when we do that calculation here. Okay, so they are actually going to be receiving a credit because they paid both of those bills, and based on our proration, they were only responsible for the total amount of those two bills, right? Or the total amount of the per diem by the 348 days. So that's how, in this situation, the seller results in a credit. So something, again, this type of proration can change. If you ever run into a situation where you're working with a client and they want to have an idea of what that tax proration is going to look like, we do have an Excel spreadsheet that we punch all of our information into to calculate tax prorations. If that's something that anybody is interested in getting a copy of, we're happy to share that with you guys. It makes it very easy calculating the tax prorations, honestly. We've used it for many, many years. It's a great little tool that we have. Or give us a call. We can help you too, okay? We're happy. We've got access. We've got a copy of the title commitment. We've got copies of the tax bills. We have the taxable value. We have the millage rates. If you need help with that, please don't hesitate to call. We're always happy to answer questions about that, okay? Anybody have any questions regarding calendar year in arrears before I move on to the next one? Okay, so we're gonna take a look. This next page here is an example of what that Excel spreadsheet looks like. So this is just a printed version here. Again, we have an Excel sheet at the office. Happy to share it with you guys if you guys would like a copy. The next page talks about due date in advance. Now, I told you guys before I don't love the term local custom, but it is a local custom in Washtenaw County to prorate due date in advance, okay? So something about the due date in advance proration. This is always, no matter what time of year, no matter what the bill looks like, that is always gonna be a credit to your seller. Always, always. Because the due date advance method is going to take the year's tax bills, the previous tax bills, the most two current bills, and those have already been paid by the seller. So the buyer is gonna credit back the seller for the portion of that bill that they're gonna be occupying the property. Now, when we say due date, this is going to be before we covered a calendar year. Due date means that the proration for the winter tax bill is gonna start December 1st. The start date for the July bill is gonna start July 1st, right? So there's gonna be different amounts for each bill. So if we take a look at our example, we've used the same closing date as April 15th. So we took the previous year's bill, so we took the December 2022 tax bill for this example. We determined how many days the buyer is going to be responsible for. So they're gonna be responsible from April 15th of 23 to December 1st of 23. So they're responsible for 230 days of this bill. So they're gonna credit about $480 to the seller on the closing statement. If we move down and we take a look at the July bill, same thing. April 15th through July 1st. So that's 77 days that the buyer is gonna give a credit to the seller for. $115. So in total, that seller is gonna receive about a $600 credit on the closing statement when prorated based on due date advance method. Right? I know I threw a lot of information at you guys, so please do not hesitate to ask me any questions regarding tax prorations if you have any. Again, there's a lot, there's even more methods than this. We are not gonna dive into those today, because I'm telling you, those are tricky methods. If you ever run into a purchase agreement where you see something and you aren't quite clear on what the method is to prorate those taxes, give us a call. And if we're not sure either, oftentimes your title company is gonna require that you have an addendum clarifying that. Because especially, let's say you have a split closing. You have two title companies, you have two agents, you have a buyer and seller, and I'm here to tell you that everybody could interpret it differently if it's worded a little funky. Okay, so it's important that we're very crystal clear on the way that the taxes are going to be prorated, because as you can see in these couple examples, it's gonna make a huge difference whether that's gonna be, a $600 credit to your seller, or what if it would, that's gonna be $600 charge to your buyer, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, does everybody feel a little more comfortable with the tax prorations? Are we ready to move on to closing statements? Okay, great. And if you change your mind, you have any more questions, do not hesitate to ask. So, again, going off of the wonderful information that Missy provided to me, she said that you guys were looking for some information on how to go over closing disclosure and closing statements. Now, the closing disclosure, the lenders in here, you guys don't have to listen to this. You guys know all of this stuff, right? So, something important to keep in mind, your lender is going to be sending this to the buyer before closing. A lot of times they're gonna send it to them several times, right? Because sometimes the numbers change up a little bit. If you notice here, we've pretty much done a whiteout on almost everything because this was an actual file that closed in our office. I tried to get rid of all of the information on it because I'm not gonna be sharing an actual closing disclosure with everybody. So, although the lender is going to be sharing this with your client, a lot of times as the agent, they have a relationship with you guys, right? So they might feel most comfortable. They might reach out to you and ask you questions and say, hey, I got this from my lender. Can you kind of go over this with me? I'm a little confused. Can you explain it to me? So we're gonna do a very quick rundown on what a closing disclosure looks like, just so you guys feel a little more comfortable with that, okay? So we're gonna start with page 1. There's a lot of information that we have done whiteout to here, but it's gonna show the borrower's information, the seller's information, the lender. It's gonna show the sale price of the property. And then this little section here, this is gonna be the terms of the loan. This is gonna show the amount of the loan. It's gonna show your interest rate. It's gonna show what your principal and interest portion of your payment is going to be. If there is an escrow account associated with this mortgage, it's gonna show what that amount is going to be that they're gonna collect from you in escrow. And then it's gonna show what your total monthly payment is going to be. Another thing that we see oftentimes in the closing world is that sometimes people get the two bottom line numbers confused. And I don't know if you lenders, if you guys ever have that issue too, where sometimes people get confused on the amount that they actually need to bring to closing. They get confused on the closing costs and the cash to close. So it's very important to know that cash to close, that's the number that we are looking for to be brought to the closing table. Okay? We're gonna go ahead and flip to the next page. The next page, just as a very quick summary, is mostly going to consist of the loan costs involved in the transaction. It has a couple of the fees that are charged by the title company. It's gonna just be our title insurance premium and the closing fee to the title company. So that's what this page is going to consist of. We're gonna go ahead and move on to the next page. The next page is gonna kind of cover the closing costs, details, just a couple other extra costs. Every transaction where there is a lender involved, we're always gonna record a deed and we're always gonna record a mortgage. That cost is not going to change. That is gonna be $65. It costs $35 to record the warranty deed, $30 to record that mortgage. In the prepaid section, it talks about homeowner's insurance premium. Also talks about prepaid insurance. Another common question that I tend to get at closing, because sometimes people are a little confused about that prepaid insurance. They'll say, wait a minute, prepaid interest. Mick's got my back here. A lot of times people will ask me, they'll say, wait a minute, my first payment is not due until January 1st, or my first payment's not due till December 1st. Yes, because you prepaid some interest on your closing statement as part of your closing costs. So that's something that you might get some questions about. Section G is going to talk about the amounts that are collected to start up that escrow account. And then H is gonna be a lot of the other additional title company fees. So in section H, you're gonna see the 2024 winter tax escrow. So that is something around this time of year that we as the title companies, we start to collect, because December 1st is kind of around the corner. What we do is we collect from the buyer, right on the closing statement, we collect last year's bill. We add a pretty hefty cushion to it, and we actually are gonna be responsible to make sure that that winter tax bill gets paid. So that's why you're seeing, cause you know, we just talked about, I was very adamant that the taxes weren't due until December 1st. But the reason that we start collecting at this time is because a lot of times lenders are gonna require us to hold an escrow on that closing statement. The rest of the
Morgan,
pages, yes.
Are you still doing millage rates by taxable plus 250?
Yes, we do, 250 is what is our cushion,
Okay.
yes, that's what we do. And oftentimes that is plenty.
Yeah.
That is plenty. It is the rare occasion when we have to reach back out to somebody and say, hey, we did not get enough money from you. We found that that 250 cushion that we hold gives us enough of that wiggle room.
Can I ask a question, because I hear this a lot?
You sure can.
G8, aggregate adjustment.
Mhm. So the aggregate adjustment is going to be, there's a legal amount that's allowed to be collected for escrow account. Lenders keep me in check here, does that sound correct?
Yeah.
Thank you. Just making sure I had that correct. So that's the amount that they're adjusting to make sure that they're collecting the legal limit to start their escrow account. Good question. That is one that I do get. The next page is going to cover, we're gonna see some prorations on here. We're going to see a seller credit. So we see the tax proration, we see that the water and sewer was prorated on the closing statement. This page also is going to continue and show the bottom lines for both parties. It's gonna show the amount that we're collecting from the borrower and the amount that we are going to be giving to the seller. The last 2 pages are going to just kind of be some extra fun information. The very last page, we whited out all kinds of stuff because it has all of the contact information for everybody involved in the transaction. It's gonna show the lender's information, the mortgage broker, both agents, and the title company that's involved with the transaction. Does anybody have any additional questions about the closing disclosure? Okay. We are gonna move on to closing statements. Am I still good on time, Missy?
Yeah.
Okay. We're gonna look at closing statements. So to be, again, we just did a quick overview of the closing disclosures. The lenders are going to be the ones typically going over that with borrowers, but just so you guys have a general understanding of what it looks like. Oftentimes, you are gonna see something that looks like this. I printed just Alta statements. Sometimes, depending on which office you're with, we print your statements on your letterhead, or you might see the statements look a little bit different than this. But with title companies across the board, most of the time you are going to see what's called an Alta settlement statement. So that's what we printed for you guys to have examples of today. Similar to the closing disclosure, you're gonna have the property address, buyer seller's information, lender information if there was a lender involved. These numbers might look a little bit familiar to you guys because it is the same file of that closing disclosure that we just went over to kind of keep the examples consistent here. We're gonna go ahead and take a look at the buyer's statement. So these are gonna be all of the exact same numbers that we saw on that closing disclosure. What I tell people at the closing, this one we can share with everybody because it doesn't have the terms of your loan printed on the first page. So this one is safe to share. We don't share copies of that closing disclosure with anybody because again, it has the terms of your loan printed on it, so we don't share that. Alta settlement statements are safe to share with all parties in the transaction. And in my opinion, for people that are coming into the closing that they don't see this stuff every day, the closing statements are a little bit easier for them to read. They're a little bit easier for them to understand because it is simple debits and credits. At the top of the buyer statement, we have the sale price of the property, which is going to be charged to them. They put an earnest money deposit down of $1,000. It's gonna show the loan amount and the seller credit that was given to them. So the seller agreed to pay for some of their closing costs, so that's where that number comes from. Taxes were prorated on the closing statement, so they did receive a credit in this case for this transaction. We're gonna see loan charges listed. We go to the second page, we're gonna see the escrow account. So again, these numbers are all gonna be the same thing we just went over, just on a little bit of a different format. We're gonna see the title fees involved in the transaction, which is gonna be the title insurance premium, the closing fee, any kind of transaction fees that were charged, homeowner's insurance, and prorations. Okay? We're gonna go ahead and move on to the seller's statement. The seller's statement, same thing, it's gonna have all the same information printed at the top. It's going to be debits and credits. So in this case, the seller is gonna be receiving that credit for the sale price of the property. They're gonna be charged for that credit that they gave to the buyer to help pay for some of their closing costs. They're gonna be charged a lien process fee because they've got a current mortgage on the property. Attorney fee to prepare the warranty deed. A lot of times people will ask that question, what is an attorney fee? We order our warranty deeds through local attorneys, and that is one of the fees that they'll charge us. It varies based on attorney. Sometimes we see 65, sometimes we see 75. It's normally right in that ballpark range of what an attorney is gonna charge to prepare that warranty deed for us. Owner's title insurance. That is something I also get a lot of questions on. They'll say, what in the world is owner's title insurance? Again, I could teach a whole class on that itself. The brief explanation that I give people is I give them a gentle reminder that they agreed to pay for that in the purchase agreement, and it is going to be for the transfer of the title. We're making sure that there are no liens against the property. We're making sure the person that's selling the property is the correct owner of the property. We're giving the buyer what's called clean title. There's gonna be.
Where does that amount come from?
That's a great question. So we have rate sheets. So those come from our underwriters. So it's a set amount, and I will tell you, from title company to title company, we all work with very similar underwriters, and the rates are within dollars of each other. So it is based on the sale price. There's not a mathematical equation for it. It's not like transfer tax where you take, 8.6% of the sale price to calculate that. But there are rate sheets. If that's something that you're interested in getting a copy of, we're happy to provide those to you. Okay? There's gonna be a wire fee because we're gonna wire transfer that payoff. So that's what that $30 is for. The commission that was charged in the transaction. On the second page, there is going to be the transaction fee. Transfer tax, which is charged by the state of Michigan anytime that a transaction takes place. Current mortgage payoff. The current water and sewer that's been due, and then a proration. Now, something else that comes up often at the closing table is a seller will say, wait a minute, why are you charging me for the water and sewer? But then, I see this credit here, it doesn't make sense. So something to keep in mind is whomever is entitled of the property at the time that a bill is issued is responsible to make sure that bill is paid. So let's say our closing was November 22nd. If that bill came out November 1st, regardless if your seller is not gonna be in that property that entire billing cycle, that bill was due November 1st, they are responsible to make sure that that bill is paid. But it's gonna be prorated, so they're gonna get a credit, so it kind of evens itself out, right? Yes?
And unlike consumers, water and sewer stick with the home.
Yes.
So if that seller doesn't pay.
That's
and
part of the
leaves,
clean title that we talked about earlier. We as the title company are checking the water, we're checking the sewer, we're checking the taxes, we're checking all the things to make sure that those have been paid. So when the buyer takes possession of the property, all things have been paid. There's nothing hanging out against the property that they have to worry about. Okay?
Thank you.
Hey, anytime. That's what we do. Does anybody have any questions about closing statements, closing disclosure? Okay. How we doing?
Good.
You want me to keep moving?
Sure.
Okay. So we have all kinds of other fun stuff to talk about with you guys today. And I do want to say, I do have a nice full list here. If for for some reason I am not able to make it to all of the topics that we have discussed, I am happy to come back and do a part 2 if there's more information, or if you're sitting here today and you're thinking, gosh, I really would like to hear so-and-so topic talked about. Give your ideas to Missy. We are happy to come down here anytime that you guys want to cover any of this stuff, because the more that we are all educated, the better the transaction we're gonna have, right? Okay. Alright, so one of the topics that we've got here is, what are some things that are often forgotten about and we always have to ask for before closing? So I will tell you guys, I confided in our expert pre-closing department for this one, because those are the nice gals that reach out to you guys, that are asking you guys for all kinds of information before the closing starts. They got back with me and they told me that divorce, death, bankruptcy, power of attorney, those are all things that we don't know if it has happened, right? If somebody's in the process of a divorce, we might not know that. If somebody died, if their death certificate has not been recorded, we don't know that. So it's important to know. We might be able to piece it together. So you say you got 2 title holders, only one person signed. We're gonna start to have some red flags go off that maybe something happened to one of those people, right? Another little thing to keep in mind is addendums. We definitely need to see copies of those. Even if you wanna send us an unsigned copy, as soon as you guys have those, if there's gonna be a major change happening to your transaction, we can get them signed at closing, right? If there's gonna be a major change happening with your transaction, we need to know that. Let's say we're gonna completely remove a buyer, or we're gonna completely add a buyer. That might sound like a really quick, simple fix, but Mick can tell you, we have to go do a whole extra piece. When we add people on, we have to search their names, we have to update our title commitment, all kinds of stuff has to be done. So anytime you have information, please give it to us. There's no such thing as too much information when it comes to the title company. Let me make it clear. There is probably such thing as too much information in general, but when it comes to the title company, please do not feel like you are oversharing with us. You can never tell us too much information about your transaction.
That is also stuff I need to know.
Yes,
I need to know who's on the title,
yes,
and if that changes, because that can affect the insurance score.
It can.
Affect the rate.
absolutely, yeah. Again, no such thing as too much information in regards to your transaction. Just to be crystal clear. Another thing that we see that is often missed is propane. If you do not disclose that there is propane, we do not know if there is propane on the property. So we had a closing not that long ago where it wasn't on the listing, it wasn't anywhere that it was propane, and we're up to the closing and somebody says, hey, I don't see the propane proration on the statement. We said, well, that's because we had no idea that there was propane on the property. So it's helpful. I mean, yes, we can, take the initiative and reach out and ask, but if you know that information ahead of time, please don't be afraid to share that with us. That is information that we're gonna need to know. Same thing if there's a tenant in the property. We don't know if you're renting it out, if you've got people that are living there. We need to know if there's gonna be a security deposit, if there's gonna be rent proration that needs to be done on the closing statement. Those are all little key pieces that we are going to have to know. Okay?
Any additional info you can provide if there is an LLC, trust, marital status, pending divorce, or even if parties got divorced 10 years ago, but the title is still in both names, because that happens, unfortunately, pretty regularly. Anything you can provide us would be very helpful, so we're getting it up front and not at the last minute. So, but I seem to see when I'm doing our title examinations that LLCs, corporations, trusts, divorces, death, I mean, the things that Morgan listed, the more you can give us, the better.
The better.
I think from a title examination perspective, John Doe's mom passed away and mom had a will and John Doe got everything, right? And so John Doe hasn't done anything to probate mom's will, just says, well, hey, I got the will right here, so I'm the owner. But that's not exactly how it works. And so the court would still need to weigh in on that. We'd have to have somebody appointed as a personal representative. So, you know, you may have someone who tells you, hey, this was mom's house, I'm gonna sell it. Right there is, let's ask a couple quick questions about, hey, how long ago did mom pass away? Was there a will? You know, any probate at the courts? Just to pass us as much info as possible. It would be very, very helpful.
Yes.
Yeah.
We also, in this little packet of fun that we provided you guys, the very last page should be a transaction worksheet. A lot of your offices, you guys have your own already. If you do, please feel free to use that. We just wanted to provide you a sample of what one looks like. This information, if you could take just a couple minutes and fill it out for us, it is so helpful. It's gonna avoid us kind of blowing you guys up a little bit before the closing, because a lot of the questions that we're going to ask you are already going to be answered. Again, if your office has one, please feel free to continue to use it. You are not required to use this sheet. It's just an example. Any information is good information.
If there's no mortgage or loan, home equity line, anything on the property too, let us know that. That's super helpful.
Yes.
It seems like our examiners ask a lot.
All the time.
Yeah.
Is there any
Yeah.
liens
Any
against the
bills?
property?
Yeah.
Bills,
Yep, bills,
outstanding
any-
past
anything-
inspection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything that you're aware of, you know, it's helpful for
We
us
like
to
to know
that.
too.
Yeah.
Sharon. You want me to keep going?
Yeah.
All right, advantages and disadvantages of split closings. So that seems to be a hot topic, right? Split closings. So I like to end on a positive note, so I'm gonna start with some disadvantages. I don't want to steer you guys away from doing split closings. At title companies, we are accustomed to that. We are used to that. I will tell you that I personally worked in Ann Arbor for several years. I had no choice but to become expert, we'll call it an expert at split closings, because almost every single transaction was one. So, they are becoming more common. I would say a disadvantage, the biggest disadvantage of having a split closing is gonna be funding. And what I mean by that is, for example, let's say you are representing a seller in a transaction and you are working with us, you're working with American Title. We are scheduled to close Monday morning at 9 a.m. with your seller. The buyer is closing with their title company at 2 o'clock, same day. That means your seller is not going to walk out of that closing with a check. They're not gonna have a copy package and they're not gonna have a check. Now, some cases, the seller might be very okay with that. If you communicate that to them ahead of time and make sure that they're fully aware of the situation, they might be okay. Oftentimes, they're not. And sometimes I have to be the bearer of bad news at the closing table. If you've sat in a split closing with me, you've probably heard my spiel about it before. That is the first thing I talk about. I give them the definition of a split closing, and then I let them know whether they're gonna be receiving their check or not after we're done signing, because oftentimes as a seller, that is what they are most concerned about, is receiving that check. So that would be a disadvantage. Now, something to kind of help that disadvantage is plan accordingly. When you schedule a split closing, you could always try to get everybody at the same time in the same place. I know that that can't always happen, but that is one way to combat that. Another thought would be is if you have the buyer sign in the morning, the seller sign in the afternoon, or you can even have them sign ahead of kind of close to the same time. Some title companies play nice with other title companies. So what I mean by that is if we have a buyer that's signing 9 o'clock in the morning and American Title's working with the seller and that seller's not signing till noon, sometimes we can ask that title company very nicely if they would be willing to send us a wire ahead of time. And we promise not to disperse funds until all of the documents have been signed. Sometimes we get a yes on that. I will tell you a lot of times we get no. They want to see those signed documents before they are willing to send us a wire. So that is the biggest difficulty with a split. advantages of doing a split closing, you get to work with the title company of your choice. A lot of, let's say, you know, you're working in a transaction and the seller is working with a out-of-town title company that you've maybe never heard of before, or maybe you've had a bad experience with before. You can say, hey, no thank you, I am going to work with this title company in the transaction. So that's an advantage because you can work with somebody that you've worked with before, that you know, that you respect, that you trust. Another kind of advantage too, sometimes people may say that too many hands in the pot is not a good thing. With split closings, it's easier to catch a mistake because there are extra eyes involved with the documents. So one title company could be looking over the stuff and say, hey, I see that you missed this here, or hey, you need to add this here. So that is an advantage of doing a split closing. Do you guys have any questions on split closings, how they work, the dynamics of them? Okay. Company transaction worksheets, are they helpful? Yes, they are very helpful. If they're filled out, let me make that clear. If you send me a blank one, that's really kind of you. Thank you so much for doing that, but we would prefer it to be filled out all the way, okay? That's gonna, again, avoid a lot less questions and less items that we have to bug you for prior to coming in. Pre-title. How long does it typically take for pre-title to be returned? Does it need to be requested specifically, or does it get processed every time? So a very quick definition of pre-title is when you are working with a seller and there's not a purchase contract yet, but you want us to pull title, verify who's in title, verify if there's any liens against the property, any easements, anything crazy out there. And you just want to take a peek at that. I will tell you, files that have a purchase agreement do take priority. And I mean that not because we don't care about pre-title, but because of the volume that goes in and out of the office, we have to take priority on files that have a buyer that have an estimated closing date that they want to get scheduled. We will get to your pre-title. It's not gonna just get ignored, but let's say you request pre-title and a week later you already have a buyer and you have a purchase agreement. At that point, the pre-title might not get done, but better yet, you're gonna have an actual title commitment at that point.
We'll move that file from pre-title into the purchase
To
agreement
the purchase
file.
rack.
That's the get this done now stack.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Well, and it costs you every time you open a file.
It does.
So if I order pre-title on a house I'm going to do, let's say, I'm going on a listing appointment.
Yep.
And you do, and you do, and you do on the same house, and we all order it at the same time. You just pulled 4 policies.
Yeah.
That have cost you 4 times, and she gets the listing. So.
She goes, of
All right, never
course.
mind, now.
You stop it right now.
Lindsay gets it.
Of course.
But what I'm saying is the reason you don't just go and willy-nilly do all these pre-titles is because if 4 people order it and none of us get the listing,
Yeah.
it's cost you
Yes.
that many times.
It does.
And things can change. If we do pre-title and then 3 months later we have a purchase
Updates.
agreement, there may have been a lien that attaches, you know, so
Right.
it helps us to already have it done because we can kind of pick up
It
where we
does.
left off,
Mhm.
but things can change.
Yes, they can. And with pre-title, if you are in a predicament where you really, 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 truly have a situation where it's questionable, the buyer needs to see something on title before they are willing to sign a purchase agreement, call us and rush it. Explain your situation, communicate with us. We are absolutely open to making exceptions, helping out when we need to, but if every time that you order pre-title, you call and rush it, we are gonna catch on to you, and we're going to know that it's not an emergency and it's not a situation where you really need it, right? So something to keep in mind, we do try our absolute best to get to your pre-title orders, but files that have an actual purchase agreement have to take priority. Okay? Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you all very, very much.